The night Elara Voss decided to run, the rain fell like it was trying to wash her existence off the earth. She moved through the manor halls in bare feet, her wedding veil still folded on the bed behind her, untouched, a symbol of everything she refused to become. Tomorrow the elders would gather. Tomorrow the priestess would tie the final knot of a bond that had been decided for her before she could even speak. Tonight, she had one chance. Her heart pounded harder than her footsteps. Every shadow in the corridor looked like her father's guards. Every creak of the floor sounded like the collapse of her last hope. She clutched a small bag against her chest, papers, a photograph she should have burned years ago, and the only necklace her mother had left her before she died. She was an omega. In her world, that word was not just biology, it was a sentence. It meant her body belonged to whoever her family decided could benefit them most. It meant the bond mark burning faintly on her collarbone was not a gift of love, but a brand of ownership. Celine Marchetti, the alpha she was promised to, was not cruel in the way stories described, but she was not chosen either. She was a business arrangement wearing the face of destiny. Elara reached the garden wall just as the storm thickened, and she climbed over it the way she used to as a child, scraping her palms raw against the stone. The old train station on the edge of town was 2 miles away, and she ran every step of it, her lungs burning, her mind screaming with the same question over and over. What if there is nowhere left to run? When the station finally rose out of the fog, its old iron roof glowing faintly under a single lamplight, she almost collapsed with relief. The platform was nearly empty. A few travelers huddled under umbrellas, a stray dog slept beneath a bench, and the distant whistle of an approaching train cut through the night like a promise. Then she saw her. A woman stood at the far end of the platform, hands in the pockets of a long dark coat, her eyes fixed on the tracks as if she had been waiting there for a lifetime. Something about the way she stood, the tilt of her head, the quiet stillness in her shoulders, made Elara's breath catch painfully in her throat. It could not be. The woman turned, slowly, as though she had felt Elara's gaze pressing against her skin. And when their eyes finally met across the rain-soaked platform, the entire world seemed to fold in on itself. 9 years. 9 years since that face had haunted every quiet moment of Elara's life. 9 years since she had convinced herself it was better to forget, because remembering hurt too much to survive. Kaia Bellamy was alive. Kaia Bellamy was standing at the train station, waiting, as though the years between them had simply dissolved into the rain. Elara's knees nearly gave out. She did not know if she wanted to run toward her or run away, because both instincts screamed just as loudly inside her chest. Behind her, somewhere in the dark streets of the town, she could already hear the faint sound of horses and shouting voices. Her father's men had found the empty room. They knew she was gone. She had run from one bond only to be pulled toward another, one she thought had died 9 years ago on a night she still could not speak about without her hands shaking. The train's whistle screamed again, closer now, cutting through the storm like a blade. Kaia took one step forward, her voice barely audible over the rain. "You came," she said. "I did not know if you would." Elara opened her mouth, but no words came out, only the sound of her own heartbeat, and behind it, the growing thunder of hooves closing in on the station. 9 years earlier, Elara had been sent to the High-Reach Academy, a school for daughters of noble packs, where omegas and alphas studied side by side under strict rules meant to prevent exactly what happened between her and Kaia. She remembered the first time she saw her, sitting alone under the old oak tree behind the dormitories, sketching the mountains in a worn notebook, ink-stained fingers, hair pulled back carelessly. Completely indifferent to the whispers that followed every alpha of low birth allowed into those halls on scholarship. Kaia was not like the alphas Elara had grown up around. She did not posture, did not demand attention, did not treat every omega like property waiting to be claimed. She simply existed, quietly powerful, unapologetically herself, and somehow that made Elara more curious than any grand gesture could have. Their friendship began with borrowed books and shared silences in the library. It grew into long walks after curfew, whispered conversations about worlds beyond the one they were born into, dreams neither of them was supposed to have. Elara had never told anyone about the way her chest tightened whenever Kaia smiled at her like she was the only person in the room. The night everything changed, they were 17, sitting on the roof of the East Wing, watching a meteor shower neither of them wanted to end. Kaia had reached over, hesitant, and laced her fingers through Elara's, and for one suspended moment, the entire weight of their world, the rules, the bonds, the expectations, simply did not exist. If things were different, Kaia had whispered, I would ask to bond with you myself. Elara had laughed through tears she did not understand, because even at 17, she knew what she felt was forbidden in every way that mattered. An alpha without status and an omega already promised to another house had no future together, not in a world built entirely on bloodlines and alliances. But for one night, none of that mattered. They spoke of running away together, of a small house somewhere by the coast, of names they would give to a life no one else could touch. It was a foolish dream, and they both knew it, yet neither of them let go of the other's hand until the sun began to rise. 3 weeks later, Kaia disappeared. No letter, no explanation, no goodbye. The academy said she had withdrawn for family reasons. Elara searched every corner of the school for answers, wrote letters that were never returned, and eventually convinced herself that whatever they had shared must not have meant as much to Kaia as it had meant to her. She cried herself sick for a month, then buried the pain so deep she almost believed it was gone. She never knew that on the same night Kaia vanished, her father had made a private visit to the academy, one that was never recorded in any official log. She never knew that the price of her silence had already been paid by someone else, long before she even understood there was a debt at all. The years after Kaia's disappearance folded into each other like pages of a book Elara no longer wanted to read. Her father, Elara Voss, wasted no time filling the space Kaia left behind. Within a year, the betrothal to Celine Marchetti was formalized, sealed with signatures and coin rather than affection. Celine was respected, composed, and utterly unreadable, an alpha groomed since childhood to inherit her family's shipping empire. She was not unkind to Elara, but she was not warm either, treating their arrangement with the same practical detachment she might apply to a merger between companies. Elara learned to smile at the right moments, to nod during formal dinners, to wear the mask expected of a future alpha's mate. Inside, something had gone quiet, the way a house feels after everyone it once held has left it. She still thought of Kaia sometimes, in the space between sleeping and waking, when her guard was too low to keep the memory locked away. She would remember the smell of rain on the academy rooftop, the sound of Kaia's laugh, low and unguarded, meant only for her. Then she would wake fully and remind herself that whoever that girl had been, she was gone, and dwelling on ghosts served no purpose in a life already decided for her. The bond mark began forming on her collarbone during the formal courtship rituals, a pale silver line that would darken permanently once the mating ceremony was complete. She hated looking at it. It felt less like a mark of love and more like a countdown, a slow-burning fuse leading toward a life she had never chosen. Her mother had died when Elara was 12, and with her went the only voice in the house that had ever asked Elara what she wanted rather than what was expected of her. Her father filled that silence with ambition, treating his daughter as a piece to be positioned on a board far larger than her own happiness. In the weeks leading up to the final ceremony, Elara began noticing small inconsistencies in the household, hushed conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, letters her father burned instead of filed, a strange tension whenever Kaia's old family name was mentioned by visiting elders. She did not understand it fully, but something in her refused to let it go. One night, she overheard her father speaking quietly with an old family lawyer about a debt from 9 years ago, a debt tied to the Bellamy family, and a payment made in exchange for permanent silence. She did not hear enough to understand everything, but she heard enough to feel the floor tilt beneath her. That was the night she began planning her escape, not fully certain of what she was running toward, only certain of what she could no longer stay and become. Back on the platform, the storm seemed to pause around them, as though even the sky wanted to hear what came next. How are you alive? Elara whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of 9 years of grief she had never properly buried. They told me you left. They told me you did not care enough to say goodbye. Kaia's jaw tightened, pain flashing across her face before she could hide it. I never left because I wanted to, she said. I left because I did not have a choice. Your father made sure of that. The sound of hooves grew louder behind them, cutting through the rain like a warning. Elara glanced over her shoulder toward the dark road leading back to the manor, panic tightening in her chest. We do not have time for this conversation here, Kaia said, extending her hand. The train leaves in 2 minutes. If you want answers, if you want a life that belongs to you, you need to trust me right now, the way you used to. Elara stared at that outstretched hand, the same hand that had once laced fingers with hers under a sky full of falling stars. Every instinct told her to demand the truth immediately, but the growing sound of shouting voices from the town square told her there was no time left to demand anything. She took Kaia's hand. The moment their palms touched, something inside her chest cracked open, a feeling so overwhelming it nearly buckled her knees, familiar and terrifying all at once, like coming home to a house she thought had burned down years ago. They boarded the train just as the whistle screamed its final warning, slipping into an empty compartment near the back as the wheels began to grind against the tracks. Through the rain-streaked window, Elara caught a glimpse of torches approaching the station, her father's men arriving only seconds too late. The train pulled away into the darkness, carrying her farther from the life that had been built around her without her consent, and closer to a truth she was not sure she was ready to face. Kaia sat across from her, silent, watching her with an expression Elara could not quite name, something between guilt and longing. 9 years, Elara said quietly, staring at the fading lights of the town through the window. 9 years of silence, and now you show up exactly the night I need to disappear. That is not a coincidence, is it? Kaia exhaled slowly, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. No, she admitted. It is not. The train rattled through the darkness, rain streaking sideways against the windows, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. My mother worked in your father's household, Kaia finally said, her voice low, careful as though each word cost her something. She managed the Eastern estate accounts. A few months before I met you, she made a mistake, or so your father claimed, a discrepancy in the ledgers that he used to threaten her position, her reputation, everything she had built. Elara's stomach twisted. What does that have to do with you leaving? He found out about us, Kaia said. Someone saw us on the roof that night. Your father came to the academy himself, not to punish me directly, but to remind my mother of the mistake she supposedly made. And what would happen to her if his daughter's reputation was tarnished by association with an alpha of no status and no future? Elara's hands curled into fists in her lap. He blackmailed your family to make you disappear. He gave me a choice, Kaia said, her voice breaking slightly. Leave without a word and my mother keeps her position, her name, her dignity, or stay and watch her lose everything because of a bond he decided was unacceptable. I was 17. I did not know how to fight a man like that. So I left, and I let you believe I simply stopped caring because the truth felt crueler than the lie. Tears slid down Elara's face before she even realized she was crying. 9 years of grief, of quiet self-blame, of believing she had simply not been enough to keep someone she loved from leaving, all of it collapsing under the weight of a truth far more painful than the lie she had lived with. You should have told me, she whispered. I would have found a way. We could have found a way together. I know that now, Kaia said. But I was young and scared, and I thought I was protecting you by disappearing completely. I spent years afterward trying to become someone strong enough that no one could ever use the people I love against me again. Elara looked up at her, searching her face for any trace of the girl she remembered, and finding her there, changed, harder around the edges, but still unmistakably the same soul who once promised her a small house by the coast. Why are you here now? Elara asked. Why tonight of all nights? Kaia reached into her coat and pulled out a folded letter, worn soft from years of handling. Because 3 days ago, I received word that your bonding ceremony had been moved forward, and I could not let it happen without at least trying to give you the choice your father never gave either of us. Elara stared at the letter in Kaia's hand, but before she could ask who had sent it, a sharp knock echoed against their compartment door. Both women froze. Through the frosted glass, the silhouette of a uniformed conductor appeared, followed by two taller shapes wearing the unmistakable crest of the Voss household guard. Elara's blood ran cold. They must have wired ahead to the next station, Kaia whispered, quickly pulling the curtain across the compartment window. Stay low and let me speak. The door slid open, and one of the guards stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the small space until they landed on Elara. Miss Voss, he said, his tone rehearsed, formal, dangerous. Your father requests your immediate return. The ceremony can still proceed if we leave at the next stop. Elara's throat tightened, old habits of obedience rising instinctively before she forced them back down. I am not going back, she said, her voice steadier than she expected. Tell my father the ceremony is cancelled. The guard's expression hardened. The bond mark on your collarbone says otherwise. Once the silver line forms fully, the union is considered legally binding under pact law, regardless of your personal wishes. Kaia stepped forward, positioning herself slightly in front of Elara. The mark is not complete, she said firmly. A bond only becomes legally binding after the final claiming ritual is performed with full consent from both parties. Elara never completed that ritual with Celine Marchetti, which means, under the very laws your family loves to hide behind, she is still free to choose. The guard hesitated, clearly unprepared for someone who understood pact law as intimately as Kaia seemed to. Elara felt something shift in her chest, a flicker of hope she had not allowed herself to feel in years. That loophole will not protect her forever, the guard said finally, though his confidence had visibly cracked. Master Voss will find another way. Then let him try, Kaia said, in front of witnesses and in front of the law, rather than in dark hallways and quiet threats. The guard glanced between them, then stepped back out of the compartment, muttering that this was not over, before disappearing down the corridor toward the front of the train. The moment the door closed, Elara exhaled a breath she had not realized she was holding, her whole body trembling. How did you know that? She asked. About the mark, about the law. Kaia sat back down slowly, exhaustion settling into her features. Because after I lost you, I spent years learning everything about the system that took you from me, hoping that one day, knowledge might succeed where courage once failed. The train slowed as it approached a small station nestled between two dark hills, steam hissing against the rain as the wheels ground to a halt. We should not stay on this line much longer, Kaia said, glancing nervously toward the corridor. Your father will have alerted every station between here and the border. We need to disembark and find another route. They stepped onto the platform just as the storm reached its peak, wind howling through the narrow station, rain slicing sideways beneath the flickering lamps. Elara pulled her coat tighter around herself, scanning the shadows instinctively, half expecting more guards to emerge from every corner. They found shelter beneath the station's narrow awning, huddled close together against the cold, and for the first time since the platform, silence settled between them, not tense, but strangely peaceful. Do you regret it? Elara asked quietly, staring out at the rain. Coming back for me, after everything it might cost you. Kaia turned to face her fully, rain dripping from her dark hair, her eyes softer than Elara had seen them all night. I regretted leaving you every single day for 9 years, she said. Coming back, even if it costs me everything, is the first thing I have done in a long time that finally feels right. Elara felt her heart clench painfully, caught between old wounds and a longing she had spent years trying to convince herself she no longer felt. I do not know how to trust this, she admitted. I do not know how to trust anything anymore, not after being told my whole life what I should want, who I should love, who I am allowed to be. Kaia reached out, gently brushing a strand of wet hair from Elara's face, her touch hesitant, careful, as though she were afraid the moment might shatter if she moved too quickly. You do not have to trust anything tonight, she said softly. You just have to survive tonight. Trust can come later, slowly, however long it takes. For a moment, neither of them moved, the rain falling around them like a curtain separating this fragile new beginning from the world that had tried so hard to keep them apart. Then, in the distance, the unmistakable sound of another train whistle echoed through the hills, along with the faint glow of torches moving along the road leading toward the station. "They found us," Elara whispered, panic rising again in her chest. Kaia's expression hardened with resolve. "Then we do not run this time," she said. "This time, we stand, and we make them listen." The torches drew closer, and within minutes, a small procession of horses emerged from the misty road, led not by Elara Voss himself, but by a figure Elara recognized instantly, tall, composed, dressed in the deep green colors of the Marchetti house. Celine had come herself. Elara's stomach dropped. She braced herself for anger, for accusations of betrayal, for the cold fury she had always imagined Celine capable of beneath her calm exterior. Instead, Celine dismounted slowly, raising a hand to halt the guards accompanying her, and approached alone, her expression unreadable in the flickering lamplight. "I was wondering how long it would take you to run," Celine said, stopping a few feet away, rain dripping from the edge of her coat. "Honestly, Elara, I am relieved it finally happened." Elara blinked, confusion momentarily overtaking her fear. "What?" Celine glanced briefly at Kaia, something like understanding passing between them, before returning her attention to Elara. "Did you truly believe I wanted this bond any more than you did?" she said. "My family needed the Voss alliance to survive a debt crisis threatening our shipping routes. I agreed to this arrangement to protect people I love, not because I ever wished to claim someone who looked at me the way you always looked at me, like a sentence rather than a person." Elara felt the ground shift beneath her again, disbelief and cautious relief warring inside her chest. "You knew I did not want this." "I knew," Celine said quietly. "Just as I know that the woman standing beside you right now means more to you than any arrangement ever could. I have known for weeks that your father was planning to move the ceremony forward before you could react, because he suspected you might do exactly this." "Then why come after me at all?" Elara asked. Celine allowed herself a small, tired smile. "Because if I return without you, your father will accuse me of failing to secure the bond, and use that failure as leverage against my family instead. But if I return having witnessed you invoke the incomplete bond clause publicly, in front of guards who will testify to what they heard, there is nothing he can do to either of us." Kaia stepped forward slightly. "You are choosing to help her." Celine's gaze softened as it settled briefly on Elara. "I am choosing to stop pretending that either of our happiness matters less than his ambition," she said. "There is someone waiting for me too, someone I have never been allowed to acknowledge publicly. Perhaps it is time we all stopped living inside bonds we never chose." For the first time since the night began, Elara felt something loosen in her chest, a fragile, unfamiliar sensation that almost felt like hope. As the storm softened into a gentle drizzle, Celine explained what she had uncovered in the weeks leading up to that night, piecing together fragments Elara had never known existed. 9 years ago, Elara Voss had not simply threatened Kaia's mother over a fabricated accounting error. He had orchestrated it deliberately, discovering early that his daughter had grown close to an alpha with no political value, and moving swiftly to eliminate what he considered an obstacle to the far more profitable Marchetti alliance. He had already begun negotiating in secret. "He needed the merger with my family long before you and I were formally introduced," Celine explained. "Your relationship with Kaia threatened his timeline. Removing her quietly, without scandal, was simply the most efficient solution available to him." Elara felt sick, the full weight of the betrayal settling over her like a physical force. "He destroyed her family, destroyed us over a business deal." "Yes," Kaia said quietly, her voice tight with old anger finally given permission to surface. "My mother lost her position anyway, 2 years later, once your father no longer needed her cooperation. She spent years rebuilding what she could and never fully recovered from the shame he forced onto her, shame she never deserved." Celine reached into her coat and produced a small folder of documents, water-spotted but legible. "This is everything," she said, handing it to Elara. Financial records proving the fabricated discrepancy, correspondence between your father and the Academy administration arranging Kaia's quiet removal, and the original merger proposal, dated months before you and I ever met, proving this was never about protecting you. It was about profit. Elara's hands shook as she flipped through the pages, 9 years of grief and self-blame finally finding a face to attach itself to, a face that was not her own and never had been. "Why would you gather all of this?" Elara asked, looking up at Celine. "Because somewhere along the way," Celine said, "I stopped wanting to be the kind of alpha who benefits from other people's pain. If we are going to confront your father, it should be with the truth, not just accusations." Kaia took Elara's trembling hand gently, grounding her. "You are not the reason any of this happened," she said firmly. "You were 17 and in love, and none of what he did was ever a consequence of anything you chose." For the first time in 9 years, Elara allowed herself to believe that fully, feeling the last thread of unearned guilt finally begin to loosen its grip on her heart. They did not have to wait long before Damien Voss himself arrived, his carriage pulling sharply into the station yard, guards fanning out around him with practiced precision. He stepped down slowly, rain glistening on his dark coat, his expression carrying the same cold authority Elara had feared her entire life. His eyes moved from her, to Kaia, to Celine, calculating, adjusting, the way he always did when a plan threatened to slip from his control. "Elara," he said evenly, "whatever misunderstanding has occurred tonight, we can resolve it privately, at home, with dignity." "There is no misunderstanding," Elara said, her voice steadier than she believed possible. "I know what you did to Kaia's family. I know why she disappeared 9 years ago. I know this bond was never about protecting me, it was about protecting your merger." For the first time in Elara's memory, something flickered across her father's face that resembled genuine surprise. His gaze snapped to Celine. "You told her." "I showed her the truth," Celine corrected. "Something you never had the courage to do yourself." Damien's jaw tightened, his composure cracking at the edges. "Everything I have done to secure this family's future. Sentiment does not build empires." "No," Kaia said, stepping forward despite the guards tensing around them. "But it destroys lives. My mother lost everything because you decided a 17-year-old's happiness was inconvenient to your timeline. Elara lost 9 years believing she was unworthy of love because of a lie you allowed her to carry." Damien's eyes narrowed, though something in his posture wavered, as though the weight of witnesses, of documented truth, of 2 powerful alphas standing united against him, had finally begun to outweigh his usual confidence. "The bond mark on her collarbone is not complete," Celine added, loud enough for the surrounding guards to hear clearly. "Which means, under pack law, she remains free to choose her own path, regardless of any arrangement made on her behalf without her consent." Murmurs rippled through the guards, several exchanging uncertain glances, clearly unwilling to enforce an order that now stood on legally shaky ground in front of witnesses. Elara stepped forward, closer to her father than she had stood in months, meeting his eyes without flinching for the first time in her life. "I am done being a piece on your board," she said. "I am choosing my own life now, starting tonight." For a long, tense moment, Damien said nothing, the rain falling quietly around them, the weight of a lifetime of control slipping visibly through his fingers. Damien Voss looked around at the faces surrounding him, the guards who no longer seemed certain whose orders to follow, Celine standing firm with documents that could unravel his reputation, and his daughter, standing taller than he had ever allowed her to stand in his presence. "If this becomes public," he said quietly, "it will damage more than just my reputation. It will damage the Marchetti alliance as well." "That alliance was never real," Celine said calmly. "It was a transaction wearing the mask of tradition. I would rather lose a business arrangement than continue pretending a forced bond is something to be proud of." Damien's shoulders sagged slightly, the fight visibly draining from him as he realized the leverage he once held had crumbled the moment truth entered the equation. "What is it you want, Elara?" he asked finally, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "I want you to release any legal claim over my bonding status," Elara said. I want the Bellamy family's name formally cleared of the fabricated accusations you created 9 years ago. And I want you to never again use another person's life as currency for your ambitions." For a long moment, her father simply stared at her, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. Perhaps regret, perhaps simply the recognition that he had lost this particular negotiation entirely. "Fine," he said at last, his voice hollow. "It will be done." He turned without another word, climbing back into his carriage, his guards following silently behind him, the entire procession disappearing back into the misty road as quickly as it had arrived, leaving only the sound of rain and the distant hum of the waiting train behind. For a moment, none of them spoke, the reality of what had just happened settling slowly over the platform. Celine turned to Elara, offering a small, genuine smile. "I will ensure the paperwork is handled properly," she said. "You are free, Elara. Truly free, for the first time in your life." Elara felt tears welling in her eyes again, but this time they carried relief rather than grief. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Celine nodded once, then glanced meaningfully at Kaia. "Take care of her," she said. "Better than the world has so far." As Celine mounted her horse and disappeared into the night, Elara turned to find Kaia watching her, rain still falling softly around them, the storm finally beginning to break apart into scattered clouds. "What now?" Elara asked softly. Kaia reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together the way she had 9 years ago beneath a sky full of falling stars. "Now," she said, "we finally get to choose." Months later, Elara stood on a wooden porch overlooking the sea, the salt-scented wind pulling gently at her hair as the sun sank low over the water, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The small house was nothing like the manor she had grown up in, modest, weathered by years of coastal storms, filled with mismatched furniture Kaia had collected from local markets. It was, without question, the first place Elara had ever truly felt at home. The path to this moment had not been simple. There had been legal proceedings, uncomfortable public disclosures, and difficult conversations with relatives who still believed loyalty to family status outweighed personal happiness. But with Celine's documentation and testimony, the truth had eventually prevailed, the Bellamy family name restored, and Elara's forced bond formally dissolved under pack law, with no consequences left to threaten either of them. Kaia stepped out onto the porch behind her, carrying 2 cups of tea, setting one gently beside Elara before wrapping an arm around her waist. "You are thinking too loudly again," she teased softly. "I can practically hear it." Elara laughed, leaning into her warmth. "I was just thinking about how different this feels," she said. "Waking up every morning knowing my life is actually mine." Kaia pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "It suits you," she said. "Freedom looks good on you, Elara Voss." "Bellamy," Elara corrected softly, turning to face her fully. "I have been meaning to ask. Does that offer from 9 years ago still stand?" Kaia's eyes widened slightly, understanding dawning across her face. "The one about bonding with you myself," she asked, a slow smile spreading across her lips. "That one," Elara said, her heart pounding with a nervous joy entirely different from the fear she had carried for so many years. Kaia reached up, gently cupping Elara's face in her hands. "I have wanted nothing else since the night I first saw you sitting beneath that oak tree," she said. 9 years could not change that. Nothing ever will." Their bond, when it finally formed months later, was nothing like the silver countdown Elara had once dreaded. It was chosen freely, sealed not with obligation or political convenience, but with 2 people who had survived years of separation, betrayal, and heartbreak, only to find their way back to each other exactly where it all began. The train station that once represented fear and escape eventually became something else entirely in Elara's memory, a place where her true life had actually begun, where an alpha had waited faithfully in the rain, refusing to let go of a promise made beneath a long-forgotten sky full of falling stars. Some bonds are forced. Others are found. And the ones worth keeping are always, in the end, freely chosen. Before the bonding ceremony could take place, Kaia insisted on one more journey, one Elara knew mattered more than any legal document or public declaration. They traveled inland, past rolling hills and quiet farmland, to a modest cottage where Kaia's mother, Elara Bellamy, had spent the last several years rebuilding a life stripped of its dignity. Elara had imagined this meeting 100 times during the long train ride, rehearsing apologies for a wrong she had not personally committed, yet still felt responsible for in some quiet corner of her heart. When the door opened and she saw Elara for the first time, silver-haired, weathered by years of quiet suffering, her throat tightened painfully. "So," Elara said, studying Elara with careful, searching eyes, "you are the reason my daughter disappeared for 9 years." "No," Kaia said gently, stepping between them. "She is the reason I finally came home." Elara's expression softened slightly, though caution remained etched into the lines of her face. She invited them inside, and over tea that grew cold untouched, Elara found herself recounting everything: the years of guilt, the belief that she had somehow been unworthy of love, the discovery of her father's manipulation, and the long journey that had finally led her back to Kaia. "Your father visited me himself," Elara said quietly, staring into her cup. "He did not shout, did not threaten violence. He simply explained, very calmly, that my daughter's happiness was a small price for my family's survival. I believed I was protecting her by allowing it." "You were protecting her the only way you could," Elara said softly. "None of what happened was your fault, just as none of it was mine. We were all pieces in a game my father built long before we ever had a choice." Elara studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind her tired eyes. "You sound like someone who has spent a great deal of time forgiving herself," she said. "I am still learning how," Elara admitted. "But I am trying." For the first time since they had arrived, Elara allowed herself a small, genuine smile, reaching across the table to take Elara's hand. "Then perhaps it is time I learned as well," she said. 9 years is long enough to carry a burden that was never truly mine." Kaia watched the exchange with visible relief, years of quiet tension finally beginning to dissolve between the two women who mattered most to her. Before they left the cottage that evening, Elara embraced Elara tightly, whispering words that stayed with her long after they had returned to the coast. "Take care of my daughter," she said. "And let her take care of you. You have both earned that much." The bonding ceremony took place on a quiet cliffside overlooking the sea, nothing like the grand halls and political spectacles Elara had grown up expecting. There were no elders reciting rehearsed blessings, no political guests calculating alliances behind polite smiles, only a small gathering of people who had earned their place through loyalty rather than status. Celine attended, standing beside a woman Elara had never met before, introduced simply as Ines, the person Celine had quietly loved for years while trapped inside an arrangement neither of them wanted. Elara sat in the front row, her hands folded gently in her lap, watching her daughter with an expression of quiet, hard-won peace. Elara wore a simple dress the color of early morning light, nothing like the elaborate gown that had waited untouched in her old bedroom the night she ran. Kaia stood at the end of the aisle formed by scattered wildflowers and driftwood, her eyes glistening as Elara approached, the sound of waves crashing gently against the cliffs below providing the only music either of them needed. The priestess who performed the ceremony was an old friend of Elara's, someone who understood that the sacred nature of a bond came not from tradition or obligation, but from the freedom of two people choosing each other without coercion. When she asked if Elara entered this bond of her own free will, Elara did not hesitate. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Completely and without any doubt." When Kaia repeated the same vow, her voice trembled slightly with emotion she no longer felt the need to hide. "I have loved her since the day I saw her sketching mountains under an oak tree," she said. "I let fear take her from me once. I will not make that mistake again." As the final words of the ceremony were spoken, the silver mark on Elara's collarbone darkened completely for the first time, not from obligation, not from a family's ambition, but from a bond formed entirely of choice. She felt no fear this time, only a quiet, overwhelming sense of arriving exactly where she was always meant to be. That night, as the small gathering celebrated with simple food and quiet laughter beneath a sky full of stars, Elara found herself standing once again beside Kaia at the edge of the cliff, looking out at the dark, endless sea. "Do you remember what you told me on the academy roof?" Kaia asked softly. "About the house by the coast." "I remember everything," Elara said, leaning her head against Kaia's shoulder. Kaia smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "Welcome home," she whispered. Their first winter together taught Elara things about herself she had never known, small domestic truths that no manner upbringing had prepared her for. She learned that Kaia hummed old academy songs while cooking, off-key and unaware, and that she still kept a sketchbook, though now she drew the coastline instead of distant mountains she could not reach. The house grew colder than either of them expected once the sea winds turned harsh, and there were nights they huddled together beneath every blanket they owned, laughing at how impractical their beautiful, drafty little home truly was. Elara did not mind. After a lifetime inside a manor with more rooms than warmth, she found she preferred the honest cold of a house that was entirely theirs to the artificial comfort of one that had never truly welcomed her. One evening, as snow dusted the cliffs outside, Elara found an old box in the back of the closet, filled with letters Kaia had written but never sent, dated across the 9 years of their separation. She sat on the floor reading them one by one, her chest tightening with every line, each letter a small confession never delivered, a private grief Kaia had carried entirely alone. "You kept all of these," Elara said quietly when Kaia found her there. "I could never bring myself to throw them away," Kaia admitted, sitting down beside her. "Even when I convinced myself I would never see you again, some foolish part of me kept writing to you anyway." Elara read one aloud, a letter written on what would have been her 18th birthday, describing a version of their future that seemed impossibly optimistic at the time: a small house, a quiet life, a love that did not need permission from anyone. It was almost word for word, the very life they now shared. "You imagined this," Elara whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Even when you thought it was impossible, you still imagined this exact life." "I never stopped imagining it," Kaia said. "Hope was the only thing your father could not take from me." They spent that night reading through the entire box together, laughing at the more dramatic entries, crying quietly at others, piecing together 9 years of longing that had somehow led them back to the same small porch overlooking the same endless sea. By the time the snow stopped falling outside, the box of unsent letters had become something else entirely, no longer a record of grief, but a testament to a love that had survived everything meant to destroy it. Spring arrived slowly along the coast, softening the harsh winter winds into gentler breezes that carried the scent of blooming wildflowers up from the cliffs. One morning, a letter arrived from Celine, the first they had received since the wedding, and Elara opened it eagerly at the kitchen table while Kaia brewed tea nearby. Celine wrote of her own quiet transformation, how stepping away from the Voss alliance had cost her family some difficult months of restructuring, but had ultimately opened doors to partnerships built on mutual respect rather than desperate obligation. She wrote, with unmistakable joy, of her official bonding with Ines, a small private ceremony held just weeks earlier, one she wished Elara and Kaia could have attended. "I used to believe happiness was a luxury people like us could not afford," Celine had written. "Watching you choose your own life that night at the station taught me otherwise. I hope you know how much your courage changed the course of my own." Elara smiled, passing the letter to Kaia, who read it with visible warmth. "We should visit them," Kaia said. "It has been too long since we thanked her properly." They made the journey a month later, traveling back toward the city neither of them had wanted to return to, though the manor now felt like a distant memory rather than a looming threat. Damien Voss, they learned, had retreated largely from public life, his reputation quietly diminished after the truth of his manipulations became impossible to fully contain, though he had honored every promise made that rainy night at the station. Perhaps out of fear of further exposure, perhaps out of some small, buried remnant of conscience. Celine greeted them warmly at her family estate, introducing Ines properly for the first time, a soft-spoken woman with an easy laugh who clearly adored her. The four of them spent the afternoon together, trading stories, laughing over tea, marveling quietly at how different their lives had become from the futures once mapped out for them by people who had never bothered to ask what they actually wanted. To choices, Celine said, raising her cup toward the center of the table as the sun began to set outside. To choices, the others echoed, and for a moment, the weight of everything they had survived seemed to soften into something almost like peace. Years later, whenever storms rolled in over the coast, Elara would sit on the porch of their small house, listening to the rain fall the same way it had the night everything changed. She no longer felt fear in that sound. Instead, she felt gratitude for the courage it had taken to run, and for the woman who had been waiting faithfully at the end of that frightened journey. Their life together was quiet, imperfect, and entirely their own, built from choices rather than obligations, from love freely given rather than bonds forced upon them by circumstances beyond their control. Celine visited often, bringing Ines and stories of a life she had finally allowed herself to live honestly. Marin spent her final years surrounded by the family she had once feared losing forever, her quiet strength honored rather than forgotten. Sometimes, late at night, Elara would think of the frightened girl who had climbed over a garden wall in the pouring rain, running blindly toward an uncertain future. She never imagined that running toward the unknown would lead her back to the one person who had always been waiting, patiently, faithfully, through 9 long years of silence and separation. Some bonds are written in ink long before two people ever meet, forced upon them by ambition and circumstance. But the truest bonds, the ones that survive heartbreak, distance, and time itself, are the ones chosen freely, again and again, every single day. And on quiet nights, when the rain fell softly against their roof, Elara would reach for Kaia's hand beneath the blankets, grateful beyond words that she had trusted a stranger's outstretched hand on a rain-soaked platform all those years ago and found her way, finally, completely home.